Well, good morning and welcome to this morning's reflection. Today we're going to begin by reading from the book of Luke, chapter 22, and verses 14 to 23. When the hour came, he took his place at the table, the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have longed to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Because I tell you, I shall not eat it again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then taking a cup, he gave thanks and said, Take this and share it among you, because from now on, I tell you, I shall not drink wine until the kingdom of God comes. Then he took some bread, and when he had given thanks, broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which will be given for you. Do this as a memorial of me. He did the same with the cup after supper, and said, This cup is the new covenant of my blood, which will be poured out for you. And yet here with me on the table is the hand of the man who betrays me. The Son of Man does indeed go to his fate, even as it has been decreed. But alas for that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to ask one another which of them it would be who was to do this thing. Our God is a God of remembrance. He is a God who remembers. In Jesus, God lives out his remembering. On the evening before his death, Jesus shared a meal with his disciples. This Last Supper was a celebration of joyful remembrance, thanksgiving, and promise. Together they celebrated God's faithfulness to them throughout their history. They remembered how God had led them, never abandoned them, and always been present. The last meal, colored as it was by grief at Jesus' approaching death and impending betrayal, was nevertheless redolent with the promise Jesus made to them. Jesus promised never to leave them, but to be present to them in a new, even fuller way. This shared meal initiated the disciples into a new relationship with Jesus, a relationship of mutuality, in which they too had a commitment. It was to be a bond of loving friendship, transcending death. The celebration took place within the context of the Passover, which was celebrated annually by the Jewish people. Passover recalled and relived the pivotal experience in their history when God delivered them out of Egyptian slavery. It was a festival of praise and elaborate ritual. Recalling the Exodus, the rite began with a preliminary blessing and a cup of wine. Bitter herbs were then served to recall the bitterness of their suffering in Egypt. At this point in the meal, the youngest male child would ask, "What does this night mean?" His father would respond by telling the story of God's faithfulness to the people of God, thereby creating for future memory the image of a loving God who remembers. After singing psalms and drinking a second cup of wine, new unleavened bread was blessed. It was eaten with the Passover lamb. The blessings and drinking of a third cup of wine brought the meal to a close. The ritual remembrance was concluded with the singing of psalms of praise. Blessing on him who comes in the name of Yahweh. Psalm 118 and verse 26. In Jesus, God lives out this remembrance, this everlasting faithfulness and loving kindness. In Jesus' life, the history of God's people Israel is recapitulated. Psalm 136. At the Last Supper, Jesus reinterpreted and brought to greater fullness the symbols of the Paschal ritual, interpreting the symbols in terms of himself. Jesus took the first cup and proclaimed the coming of the kingdom when he would drink wine with them again. He identified the unleavened bread with his own body. No longer to be known as the bread of affliction eaten in bondage. This bread was to be the bread of freedom. Through this bread, the disciples would experience the liberating presence of Christ with them, individually and communally. Jesus identified the third cup of the Paschal meal with the new covenant in his blood. The sacrifice of the Passover lamb had given way to Jesus' offering of his own self, the offering of his entire life, culminating now in his death. Because blood is life, and the flow of blood unites in one life, Jesus' blood symbolizes and effects a forceful union between God and the people of God. Jesus' covenant of blood is a covenant of life. Do this in memory of me. Jesus told his disciples to continue living their relationship of love with him through the continuing celebration of his presence among them. He promised that in their future remembering, in their memorializing of his presence, he would represent himself to the Christian community whenever they recalled his last shared meal with them, blessed and shared bread and wine. In this living representation of himself in love for them, they would experience their union with him and with each other. Through their active participation in this memorial celebration, they would be incorporated in the power of Jesus' death and resurrection, and their lives, like his, would be blessed and given for others. Do this in memory of me. In bread broken and wine poured, we receive our lives, the healing of what has been, the joy of who we truly are, and the promise of all we may yet be. So let us quiet ourselves and just for a moment relax into God's presence. Take a moment to imagine yourself at the table with Jesus and his disciples. See the room in which all are gathered and notice if it is big or small. Is it well lit or is it dark? Is it warm or is it chilly? Continue to notice the atmosphere of this room. Then you see the table, its cloth, the cups, and the other dishes. Then observe the disciples as they recline at the table. Allow yourself time to take note of each individual's expression. Notice whether the person appears to be joyous, fearful, expectant, or sad. Listen attentively to their words, particularly to the way the words are spoken, whether they are filled with love, kindness, a sense of grief, fear, or deceit. Aware of Jesus' approaching death, focus your attention on him. See his expression, the way he looks at his disciples. Allow yourself to contemplate his face. Become aware of your feelings, the feelings you experience when you look into the face of Christ. Hear Jesus speak. Listen as he leads his followers through the Passover. Watch and listen as he blesses and shares bread and wine with them and invites them to do this in memory of him. Be attentive to your own feelings. Now ask Jesus, what does this night mean? And allow yourself to be quietly present as you receive Jesus' response to this question. And I'll leave you in that conversation.